September 19th, 1944. 0615 hours. Near Arracourt, eastern France. The Lorraine countryside lay smothered in morning fog, thick as wool, damp and cold. It rolled low across the fields, curling between hedgerows and farmhouses, like smoke from some unseen fire. Through that gray silence came the Panthers, the armored beasts of Germany's 113th Panzer Brigade. Their engines rumbled deep, growling under steel hides, their treads churning the wet earth into mud. 39 of them, factory fresh, confident and deadly. But that morning, something unseen waited in the mist. According to the brigade's after-action report, at approximately 0620 hours, the lead elements made contact with enemy armor. Unknown type, not Shermans, not Churchills, something else. The enemy's vehicles moved like shadows, fast, darting between fog banks. They engaged at 400 to 800 meters, firing, then disappearing before German turrets could even traverse. Within 5 minutes, 3 Panthers lay burning. And then, a sound. A sound German tank crews had never heard before. A high-pitched whine, almost like an aircraft engine, shrill and alien compared to the deep growl of their Maybachs. Low silhouettes materialized through the fog, flourish flaring like lightning, then gone. The entire attack lasted less than 20 seconds per strike. That morning, Colonel Erich von Fonshendorf's brigade was about to discover a terrifying truth. The Americans had built a tank destroyer that could reach 55 miles per hour, faster than anything in existence with tracks. German doctrine had never accounted for such a machine. They had imagined tank destroyers as lumbering fortresses, like their own Jagd Panthers, armored walls carrying monstrous guns. But the Americans had built something else entirely. They had built the Hellcat. It began not on the battlefields of France, but years earlier, in the shadow of defeat. December 1941, the world trembled. The German blitzkrieg had already swept across Europe like a storm of steel and fire. Poland gone in 35 days. France, with the largest army on the continent, shattered in just 6 weeks. Conventional thinking had failed. Nations built great fortresses of armor, static defenses, trenches, all swallowed whole by the panzer divisions. The Wehrmacht had proven that speed, concentration, maneuver could tear down empires. Into this crucible stepped Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce, a cavalryman at heart, a man who still believed in speed, in the dash of horsemen who once thundered across open plains. And at the War Department, in a small classified briefing room, he proposed something radical. Instead of building tanks to match the Germans, ton for ton, gun for gun, what if America built hunters? Not fortresses, predators. Machines that would stalk and strike the way cavalry once did. Fast, mobile, untouchable.
The doctrine was simple. Seek, strike, destroy. The Ordnance Department listened, and in December of 1941 they issued their requirements, a fast tank destroyer. At first, the ideas were modest, a 37mm gun, then 57, then 75, and finally, the weapon that would define the Hellcat, the 76mm. Suspensions were debated. The Christie system was considered, then abandoned. Torsion bars were chosen instead, flexible, rugged. By April 1943, Buick's prototype ruled out. They called it the T-70. When they tested it, the engineers themselves could scarcely believe it. A tracked vehicle, moving with such speed, it looked wrong, unnatural, like a predator that refused to obey the laws of its own biology. Meanwhile, German intelligence caught whispers of this project, and they laughed. They dismissed it as American naivety. To the Wehrmacht, a tank destroyer meant thick armor, heavy guns, 40 tons of iron like their Jag Panther. So when they learned the Americans were building a machine that weighed just 17.7 tons, protected by armor barely thicker than 25 millimeters, they called it absurd, militarily useless. But they had not yet seen it in motion. And in May 1944, during the breakout from Anzio, they would. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division made first contact. German crews described it in stunned reports. Low silhouettes racing across the battlefield faster than reconnaissance cars, yet carrying 76mm guns. They struck, they vanished. Return fire? Ineffective. Berlin filed those reports away as exaggeration, combat stress, fantasies. After all, no tank could move like that. But in September 1944, the truth would come crashing down at Arracourt. September 19th, 1944. 06:30 hours. The fog clung to the hills of Lorraine like a shroud. Visibility, barely 50 meters. In the mist, 39 Panthers advanced in silence, their dark shapes like predators stalking through ghostly fields. Inside the German steel beasts, the crews strained their eyes, nerves taut. They expected American Shermans, clumsy, predictable prey. The commander of the 113th Panzer Brigade had told them the fight would be simple. They would crush the enemy's armored line before breakfast. But fate had other plans. At the village outskirts, hidden behind hedgerows and barns, the Americans lay in wait. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Ordinary men, but with extraordinary machines. The M18 Hellcats. Engines idled low. Crews whispered through intercoms. Hands trembled over triggers, breath fogging inside open turrets. Their commander had been clear. Do not fire until you see the whites of their crosses. And then the fog shifted. The first Panther appeared, its massive hull slicing through the mist like the bow of a battleship. A Hellcat gunner exhaled. Crosshairs settled. On the way, the 76mm barked like thunder. A flash lit the fog. The shell tore through the Panther's side armor at 500 meters. In an instant, the beast erupted. Flames, smoke, steel shrieking as its turret wrenched sideways. One shot, one kill. The Hellcats darted, engines roared, tracks churned, positions shifted. They never stood still. Fire, move, fire again. The Germans tried to answer. Panthers traversed their heavy 75mm guns, but the fog betrayed them. By the time they aimed, the Hellcats were gone. Ghosts vanishing into gray. Within minutes, 3 more Panthers were burning wrecks, their black smoke curling upward into the thick morning air. Panic began to spread. German commanders barked orders, but confusion reigned. Reports screamed through radios. Fast tanks, open tops, impossible speed. Some thought they faced aircraft on the ground. Others swore they were seeing some new American trick. Colonel von Fondendorf himself would later admit, "We could not comprehend what we faced. They moved faster than any tank should. They were not normal machines." For the Americans, it was working exactly as doctrine intended. The Hellcats struck like cavalry. Speed was their armor, surprise their greatest weapon. By noon, the German advance had slowed to a crawl. Panthers sat half-hidden in ditches, crews terrified to move into the killing fields. And all the while, the Hellcat circled, stalking, waiting for the moment to pounce again. That day, the myth of German invincibility cracked. At Arracourt, a handful of lightly armored Hellcats stopped the charge of an entire panzer brigade.
The battlefield around Arracourt was no longer countryside. It was a graveyard of steel. By mid-morning, the fog began to thin, revealing a terrible sight. Burnt-out hulks of Panthers littered the hedgerows. Flames licked through shattered turrets. Ammunition cooked off inside wrecks, bursting with hollow thuds that echoed like dying heartbeats. The German crews had expected a triumph. Instead, they were being hunted. Each time a Panther tried to push forward, a Hellcat appeared from nowhere, darting from a tree line or sliding through a gap in the mist. The Americans never stood still. Seek, strike, destroy, always moving, always unpredictable. Imagine sitting in a Panther, 45 tons of armor beneath you, and yet feeling naked, helpless. Your gunner struggles to find a target. Your driver strains to keep formation, but every shadow could be death. A low silhouette flickers in the distance. By the time you shout, by the time the turret swings, it's too late. Another 76mm shell slams home. The Panther jolts, metal screams, fire erupts. Another crew scrambles out, faces black with smoke, only to be cut down by machine gun bursts. One by one, the giants fell. By 1100 hours, radio chatter inside the 113th Panzer Brigade had turned to chaos. Where are they? They're behind us. No, left flank, left flank. But there was no left flank, no right flank. The Hellcats were everywhere and nowhere. The German doctrine of overwhelming power, of heavy armor crushing resistance head-on, was useless here. Against the Hellcats, the battlefield itself became a maze. And in that maze, the Panthers were prey. Colonel von Fondendorf tried to regroup. He ordered his men to dig in, to hold ground until reinforcements could arrive. But the Americans didn't give him time. At 1330 hours, another wave of Hellcats struck. Engines screaming, they charged across open fields at full speed, guns blazing. They fired on the move, something the Germans considered reckless, almost insane. But the Hellcat crews had practiced it, perfected it. Imagine being a German commander, staring through binoculars as a pack of enemy vehicles, light and fast, sprinted across your front like wolves. You order fire. Shells land short, others long. Your gunners curse the fog, the speed, the madness of it all. And then another Panther explodes, and another. By 1500 hours, the battlefield stank of burning oil and scorched flesh. The black smoke rose high, visible for miles. Reports claim some German crews abandoned their tanks outright, choosing to flee on foot rather than face the phantom hunters again. That day, 22 Panthers were destroyed. Half of von Fondendorf's brigade gone in less than 12 hours. And the Americans? They lost 4 Hellcats. 4. The myth of German armored superiority died in the fields of Arracourt. For the first time the world saw the truth, that speed, cunning, and mobility could shatter brute force.
that a 17-ton machine with thin armor could outfight the most feared tank in Europe. That day, the Hellcat earned its name.
When the guns finally fell silent at Arracourt, the smoke hung heavy over the hills. The German advance had been stopped cold. The 113th Panzer Brigade, bloodied, broken, and humiliated, limped back, leaving behind a field of steel coffins. For the Americans, it was more than just a victory. It was a revelation. The M18 Hellcat was never meant to fight toe-to-toe with Panthers. On paper, its thin armor should have made it a death trap. Military logic said it shouldn't have survived. But at Arracourt, logic failed, doctrine failed. The impossible became reality. The M18 Hellcat had proven that speed could be stronger than armor, that cunning and maneuver could topple giants. In the weeks that followed, the story of Arracourt spread through the ranks. Tank crews whispered of the ghost machines that raced faster than trucks, slipping through fog, destroying Panthers, and vanishing again. German prisoners were questioned. Again and again, they insisted it was not possible. No tank can move like that. And yet, the evidence smoldered all around them. For the men of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, there was no doubt. They had stared into the eyes of the most feared tanks in Europe and walked away victorious. They would carry those memories for the rest of their lives. The roar of the Hellcat's engine, the recoil of its 76mm gun, and the burning silhouettes of enemy armor in the fog. Even decades later, veterans would recall it the same way. We weren't the strongest, but we were the fastest. And that was enough. The Hellcat's legacy endures, not as the heaviest, not as the most armored, but as the predator that defied expectations, the hunter that rewrote the rules of armored warfare. At Arracourt, on that misty morning in September 1944, the Hellcat proved that sometimes the swiftest strike lasts longer than the heaviest blow. And so, the fields of Arracourt grew quiet again. The fog lifted, farmers would one day return, plowing soil that still hid twisted iron beneath its surface. Children would grow up in villages rebuilt from rubble, never knowing that once the ground they played on shook under the tread of giants. For the men who fought there, the memories never faded. The smell of burning oil, the thunder of engines at dawn, the split-second decision between life and death. Ask them years later, and they would say, "We weren't heroes, we were just doing our job." But history remembers them differently. Because at Arracourt, they proved a truth older than war itself, that speed, courage, and cunning can overcome even the strongest foe.
that the hunter doesn't need armor thicker than his prey, only the will to strike first and strike fast. The Hellcat was more than a machine. It was an idea that turned the tide of a battle and wrote itself into legend. If this story moved you, if you could almost hear the engines in the fog, see the flames in the hedgerows, and feel the weight of history, then I invite you to stay with us. Hit that like button if you felt the rush of the Hellcat. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories told the way history deserves to be told, slowly, richly, like you were right there. And don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss the next chapter we uncover together. Thank you for walking this battlefield with me. Until we meet again, remember the lesson of Arracourt. Sometimes the swiftest strike lasts longer in memory. Good night and Godspeed.